Bitcoin is money that reflects the beauty of the natural world, and because it reflects the order of the natural world, it is going to a very, very, very high price point. And you probably need way less Bitcoin than you think in order to be able to retire in the far future. And also, of course, you have to accept the negative trade-offs of that kind of far future. So we're going to talk about all those things in this video, but we're going to start with these stalks of corn. What do these have to do with Bitcoin? Well, it's very simple. We humans value things that are less probable to occur in nature than things that are more probable to occur in nature. If you find a random field that had corn in it thousands of years ago, or the ancestors of modern versions of corn, that would be less valuable than this modern version of corn, right? In this modern cornfield, you have corn that goes out in rows and columns, right? You have corn that's been bred and modified over the course of thousands of years to have larger ears of corn, and therefore you get way more calories and it's way more organized, right? Things that are more difficult to occur by chance are things we objectively view as more valuable, right? I mean, that's like kind of the difference between life and non-life, right? A rock that you find on the ground or just dirt is not nearly as valuable as finding some life, like a living organism, right? The oxen that's plowing the dirt to make the field of crops is way more valuable than the plow itself or the dirt itself, right? I think another example that is one that I personally like and that a lot of people in Bitcoin have used over the years is that of honey, or that of the honeypot problem, you know? And it's the same thing with flowers and with bees, right? You know, flowers are more difficult to find in nature than just random grass, and so we value the flowers more, right? We find them beautiful, we put them together in bouquets, right? We give them to significant others because flowers are a more unique plant or less probable plant to find than that of grass, right? And the bees convert flower power into honey. And we value honey, right? We like honey. Honey is like nature's candy, so to speak, right? You know, we value that as something that is more valuable than just random liquid or random water or random oozing substance you find out in the middle of nowhere, right? Honey is a more valuable commodity because it's more difficult to produce. The same thing is true with wood, right? There are plenty of trees in the world, but wood that has been chopped up and organized is more valuable than wood that you find on a random tree because this wood has been processed. Energy has flowed into these pieces of wood by a person cutting them, right? These are more valuable than just a random piece of wood. And so what does this have to do about Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin, it's the same concept. The reason why Bitcoin is valuable is the same concept. It is less likely to occur in the universe of numbers than a random numerical output, right? In the same way that in an analog world, chopped up trees are statistically less probable to find than normal trees, real trees, it's the same kind of concept with Bitcoin. That it is a number, sure, and all forms of money are just numbers, but Bitcoin is the least probable number to occur in nature. And see, with political currency, it is the polar opposite. With political currency, you can just make more numbers, right? It can be pretty abundant, right? If you have a big enough gun, if you're charged in a big enough country, or you have the right certain central bank in charge, you can just make more numbers. But Bitcoin is like rolling a set of dice. It's probabilistic based. So what you see here are these 8 dice, these 8 dice here. All these have ones on the top, right? This is something that you can say with pretty high probability, Luke probably put this here like that, and you'd be correct, because it's really difficult to roll a random set of 8 ones. There's one 1, but in order to get all 8 B1s, it's much easier for me to just recreate the results artificially than to do the effort to actually roll these dice, you know, a few dozen or even a few hundred times trying to get this certain output. And this is the difference between political currency and that of Bitcoin. Political currency is trying to get the result without the effort to get that result. Political currency says, hey, I'm the guy in charge, I'm the guy in the suit and a tie, I have the gun, I'm the guy that gets to make the rules, and by decree, by fiat, I'm going to say, let there be energy. I'm going to say, let there be light. I'm going to be my own kind of monetary god. And I'm going to say, my random set of numbers is now valuable enough because look, it's difficult enough to reproduce. It's valuable enough that you have to give me your wood. You have to give me your wheelbarrows. You have to give me all the things that you produce with actual energy, actual productivity. And this is not right. This is not ethical. What it means is that the people that are working hard, trying to produce a living and produce commodities that we actually need to live and survive, they're being stolen from, and they are enriching the people that are manipulating numbers to get a certain result. If this represents a given amount of currency, a given amount of political currency, then what I'm doing is I'm fraudulently faking something that's difficult to do in order to extract real wealth from the world that actually is difficult to do. And so Bitcoin, or in particular Bitcoin hashing, is the same kind of concept where, yes, Bitcoin is just a number. It's totally arbitrary. The number of 21 million Bitcoins is arbitrary, right? You know, it wasn't by pure chance it was chosen, right? It was chosen because algorithmically it makes sense on the distribution schedule for Bitcoin. But the numbers are relevant. It doesn't matter if there were 21 million Bitcoin. It doesn't matter if there's 21 trillion Bitcoin. What matters is the number is consistent, and just as importantly, those monetary units only can come about as genuine proof as a result of somebody putting in a lot of work. So in the very early days, in the very, very beginning of Bitcoin, there was only one needed. So there we go. We just got our little one. This would result in a given amount of Bitcoin. They put in hash, you put in energy into computers, and you're trying to get an output, right? This is an output here. The input I'm putting in is the energy of, you know, rolling the dice with my hand, right? And this is what Satoshi did in the first few years when he was pretty much universally the main guy, or the only guy, running the Bitcoin software, right? With his nodes, with miners, right? This is what he was doing. It was very easy. The difficulty was low, right? However, over time, as more people began rolling dice, proverbially, oops, and I just dropped one, more people had to start rolling, and eventually you had to get 2 ones required to get a valid Bitcoin block, aka get a given output of a new currency unit distributed onto the network. So as it gets more difficult, the total output hash has to get lower, right? Obviously this number is lower than the previous one because there's 2 ones at the front, right? If you think of this like a number, let me put these in line here. What you're looking at is 11,426, 11,426,222. This number is inherently lower than, let's say, this number because there's a 5 in place of that 1. And so over time, as more and more people are rolling the dice, eventually you got to get 3 ones. Now, of course, I'm cheating here. There we go. So again, we have 11,143,655. This number is lower than the previous one. So as it gets more difficult as it gets less probable to get the output, that means that you're lowering the number, right? And so with Bitcoin, the reason why we know Bitcoins have taken energy to produce, the reason why we know that is because it's designed cryptographically with the SHA-256 hash function that every difficulty adjustment upwards is giving us a lower target to meet, meaning we need more lower numbers in the front, meaning we can verify that the monetary units that have been created in the Bitcoin network have had an energy cost with it. Because the reality with Bitcoin today and how absolutely large it is that it's a much, oh, look at that. Okay, that was by chance. Wow, I'm actually really impressed with that. I got 4 ones there. Okay, that was really unlikely, right? But to get all 8 at the same time, I would literally be out here for hours. You know, it would be, there was 3. Oh, wow, there's 5. Okay, something is really off here. I'm getting really lucky with my dice. That is, I'm recording it live, you know. But, you know, point is that as much as 4 or 5, as improbable as those are, they're still way more probable than rolling all 8 ones at once in a single try. There's 2 ones. Let's see if I can do it again. Let's see if I can get 3 again. So there's 2 again. So the point is that the reason why we know Bitcoin is getting more secure, there's 4. The reason why we know Bitcoin's getting more secure over time. Wow, there's 4 4s. Look at that. Look at wow, I'm amazed as I'm doing this. There's another one. The reason why we know Bitcoin is more secure, and the reason why people say Bitcoin gets cheaper over time as the price goes up, is because as the price goes up, the difficulty increases, and therefore the number required in an output to create or discover the next valid block is going up. So actually, as Bitcoin grows, it's not becoming a larger target, it's well, it is becoming a larger target. However, it's getting more and more difficult to attack over time. And this is why Bitcoin over the long term is destined to survive when all the political currencies are destined to fail. You see, with traditional political currencies, the honeypot gets larger and larger, right? Let's say, in metaphorical terms, in the world we have 1 log worth of global economic output, right? The sum total of global wealth is 1 log, right? Let's say this is thousands of years ago, right? That's the amount of total global wealth. Now, if I'm the person in charge of my political currency, and I, with the barrel of a gun and artificial numbers that I manipulate to whatever I want, because there's not a proof of work of rolling the dice with my wrist, but it is a proof of authority or a proof of stake of just managing the numbers however I want, or redistributing them to whatever's going to enrich me at the expense of others, I have a pretty strong incentive to just steal that log and take it for myself via accounting fraud and theft, right? But if instead of 1 log of wealth, you have, whatever, 200 logs of wealth, the incentive grows. The more wealth that is produced by the productivity of the world, by the capitalists, by the entrepreneurs, by the business owners, and by the laborers of the world, the more wealth that's produced, the greater the incentive for me, Mr. McBusinessman, with my artificial numbers, to just steal it from you with confiscation, either directly with direct violent tyranny or indirectly with political currency tyranny and accounting fraud, right? Now, if we go from a couple hundred logs in the world to literally thousands, all of a sudden, the incentive grows even more. And this is the fundamental problem with political currency, why it is so terrifying to me in the coming 10, 20, 30, 50, 500 years. This is why it's concerning, that the greater the honeypot grows, the more wealth there is, the greater the incentive for somebody using and leveraging a fraudulent political currency to try to take over the system, and the more difficult it is to remove that parasite from the global economy. Let me give an example. So here I am recording this in the United States of America. It's a wonderful country. We started this country in the 1770s, revolting against the British Empire, King George, right? And that empire, with the Boston Tea Party, out in Boston, we were rejecting the political currency of King George and the artificial taxes and debasement and everything else from mainland Britain, thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean. But now today, in Boston, we have one of the Federal Reserve District buildings sitting right across from where the Boston Tea Party occurred. And so my point is that we have exchanged a monetary dictator thousands of miles away using wind power and gunpowder and cannons as his form of tyranny, where they use muskets, right? We've gone from that world to this new modern world. Because there's more global wealth in the world, we have a much more powerful dictator in the world than we did then, right? Of the US government. Now, I'm not saying that the US government is equally as dictatorial as other political regimes in the world, but we are objectively way more technologically powerful than we were hundreds of years ago. And so this is my main concern. If we continue down this path and we continue producing more and more wealth with the advent of artificial intelligence, with more software, more computers, more humans, more everything working harder, faster, better, stronger over the course of decades, we're going to get a heck lot more wealth, right? We're going to go from turning this one pile of wood into this larger pile of wood. That whole field is going to be filled with productivity over the course of the next few decades. And it's really important that as that productivity emerges, that we have a monetary system that is based on proof of work, not proof of authority. Because if you have your currency based on a proof of authority, then the one in charge, the one that's able to decree where energy is spent or given in the world, that person in charge is going to be the one with the biggest gun, and they'll be able to use all of that productivity, reinforcing the feedback system of the gun. So what does this mean for you? And what does this mean for in context of how early you are to Bitcoin? The context of how early you are to Bitcoin is that if all of this is true, if Bitcoin genuinely gets more secure the larger it grows, while political currencies get weaker the larger they grow, then that means that we are basically inevitably going to win. If Bitcoin is already a pretty decently large size, it uses more energy than that of a moderately sized country, right, like Argentina. If Bitcoin is already that big and it only gets more secure as it grows, and Bitcoin already has survived attacks from Putin, from China, from terrorist groups and all other sorts, even Bitcoin's own internal group during the block size wars, about a decade ago, right? If Bitcoin has survived all those things already, then it's exceedingly likely, in my opinion, to continue surviving in the future. And it's going to use more and more energy for more and more hashing, and it's going to get more and more difficult to reproduce, right? Over time, we're going to go from Satoshi's main dice in 2009 to eventually more dice, and eventually this whole table here is going to be filled with dice. And it's going to be so improbable to create more Bitcoin that we will never be able to create more than 21 million. So the reason why you should be excited is that, yes, sure, that means Bitcoin's going to go up in terms of dollars, right? You know, infinity over 21 million. Bitcoin, in terms of political currency, is going up literally forever. It's never going to stop. However, the more exciting thing that you should be passionate about is not how are we distributing the current world wealth. The real excitement should be how are we going to produce more global productivity? How do we create more logs? How do we create more global wealth for more people? How do we get more food, water, shelter, and technological abundance in the hands of more people? One of the things a lot of people that are pessimists and comment down below in my videos saying that I'm too bullish on Bitcoin. You know, a lot of those short-sighted, zero-minded people would say, oh, Luke, it's not fair to say that a few 100,000 Satoshi is going to be a significant amount of wealth, because you got to keep in mind, Luke, clearly you forgot, Luke, that the bottom 5 billion people in the world don't have a lot of wealth. You're exactly right. The bottom 5 billion people in the world don't have a lot of wealth. And that's not me being short-sighted. That's not me casually forgetting that the bottom 60% of the global population does not have any significant amount of wealth. It's actually exceedingly bullish and exciting if you're actually into Bitcoin for the long term. And the reason why is that look at all the wealth we've created in the world, right? Look at all that wealth. Up until like 150 years ago, there were only like a couple 100 million people that were real contributors to the global economy. Here we are today in the mid-2020s. There are a couple billion people that are economic producers, significant economic producers in the world, right? Like the vast majority of people in the world, with all due respect, don't have a very large impact in the economy just because they don't have a lot of wealth, they don't have a lot of leverage, they don't have a lot of influence in the global economy, right? I'm not saying that they're lazy, I'm just saying that that's the reality of where they happen to be born in. I'm very grateful that I was born in the United States of America, right? And so, if we've created all this wealth where every single person basically has a supercomputer in their pocket, and most people have food, most people have electricity, most people have plumbing, most people have the internet, right? If we live in this technologically abundant world, after only a couple billion people for basically a century or half a century contributing to global productivity, what do you think is going to happen as Bitcoin takes over, as political currencies hyperinflate into irrelevance? What do you think is going to happen when we go from a couple billion people contributing to the global economy and, you know, at moderate levels of efficiency? What do you think is going to happen where, you know, a few decades from now, we have another billion people, then another billion people, right? Even if it takes half a century for the bottom 2/3 of the global population to enter into a much more wealthy level, if it takes decades for that to happen, like one way or the other, we are going to have more productivity a few decades from now than we do in the present. And that's forgetting the fact that we have AI, software, computers, automation, robotics, all those kinds of things coming rapidly that are going to help automate all kinds of other labor, right? Like quite literally, you know, I've done this before and I should make a video on this in the near future, but if you plot the number of productive human hours over the course of human history, it's like a hockey stick. Obviously with human population, it's a hockey stick. But when you extrapolate forwards, moderate growth levels of the share of global wealth, the share of the global population becoming wealthy, and when you also model in possibilities of robotics and AI, you know, coming in and helping make more productivity, you realize we're not at the stick end of the hockey stick. We're way back on the handle, right? Like over the next few decades, there's going to be more productivity and more labor hours than the previous century, right? If you go out a few decades beyond that, then the sum total of human history, like quite literally, it's very possible. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but it's very possible the majority of productive hours contributed to the economy are in the next 50 years, not in the last 5,000 years. That's a really big idea, and that should be what gets you excited about Bitcoin. Because since Bitcoin is a monetary system that relies on proof of work and basically relies on the energy of the whole world rolling their proverbial dice, trying to get a certain output, because Bitcoin relies on that with cryptographic proof, and not a proof of authority of who happens to have the biggest gun manipulating results into the answer they want, right? Because Bitcoin doesn't rely on proof of authority and it instead relies on proof of work, that is a much more optimistic thing. So yes, your Bitcoin is going to millions of dollars a coin. Yes, it's going to tens of millions of dollars a coin. But the more important thing, the more significant thing is that it means for you, for your kids, and hopefully for your grandkids, that the future has a higher probability of being peaceful, even though in our current world, with our current political currency and our current understanding, the current trajectory is pointing towards more conflict and more violence. Without Bitcoin, the world is going to be a very violent, very dystopian place, as we have more and more wealth just up for grabs for the person with the biggest gun. You know, if you have that kind of system, then the incentive is who has the biggest gun and who is the least afraid to use it, right? But with Bitcoin, the new incentive is instead, how do we produce as many logs as possible? How do we produce as much electricity and economic output as possible so that in our excess energy, we can shuffle as many cards as possible. We can roll as many dice as possible to have the greatest probability of getting a certain Bitcoin economic output. So that's the good thing. That's the bullish thing. The bullish thing is that you probably need way less Bitcoin than you expect in order to be able to retire someday. Or, you know, if not you, retire your kids, right? And this is the funny thing, is that your kids are going to probably have way longer of a retirement than you, no matter your age, right? For me, I'm in my mid-20s, right? And, you know, I think I'll probably be able to retire much earlier than, well, I could probably retire now if I wanted to, but I don't really want to. And I think the whole idea of retirement in of itself is, I don't know. I always want to be doing something, you know? I don't really want to just sit around and do nothing. I got to twiddle my thumbs. I got to be productive, right? I have that urgency to do that. I've always kind of been that way, and Bitcoin has definitely heightened that. But the point is that my kids and my grandkids and your kids and your grandkids, they are going to be able to have way more time than you or I would ever be able to have, right? Because in that future, their income will have been demonetized so much. There'll be so many logs just produced as a result and a byproduct of all the productivity of the world that their incomes of sawing logs and chopping down trees, like, they're going to be demonetized, right? You can't have a hyper automated, a hyper productive future where human income is still monetized, right? So I promised at the beginning of this video, back all the way in the cornfield, that I would give you the bullish, hopium, optimistic perspective, but you also got to factor in those very real, in many aspects, negative downside consequences. And this is one of the consequences. If you are not prepared for an AI software automated future with hyper productivity, then you're going to be out of luck, because your income will have been demonetized. If your savings is in logs and your income is in cutting down trees, you're going to be out of a job when the whole world is hyper competing for your industry. And software, AI, and future productivity we can't even imagine yet, all of it is going to be hyper competitive, chasing after your productivity. And so you don't get to have a future where, you know, if we were having this conversation in the early 20th century, you don't get to have a future of the automobile without the trade-off of basically all horses being retired forever. And the same thing's probably going to be with people. Whether you like it or not, whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, it doesn't matter. But very probably a large number of people are going to be productive in the future, because hopefully Bitcoin, along with productivity and wealth, brings the bottom 5 billion people out of, you know, out of developing economies into developed economies, right? So there will be a heyday of human contributions to labor, but eventually that will go away as we become so productive that we even phase that out. And so that is one potential downside. Another potential downside to keep in mind is that if you're going to have Bitcoin, the superior monetary system, the denominator of global currency, take over the world, we are going to have hyperinflations over the next 50 years, right? People want to tell me, oh, Luke, you're so bearish. You know, they comment down below in the comment section, oh, Luke, you're so bearish. Why do you think Bitcoin's going to take decades to be adopted? Why? Blah, 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 right? They have all this, you know, angst, probably because they don't get outside and touch any grass. But the problem is, as much as I am a fan and supporter of Bitcoin, we have to remember that if Bitcoin's going to win as a global denominator, all the numerators are going to go extinct. All the political currencies are going to collapse, right? Yeah, sure, America, Europe, Japan, China, of course the big ones, but all the tiny ones of all the 100 nations out there that are much smaller, much more vulnerable, where there are millions and collectively billions of people that are just trying to survive, trying to get by, right? These aren't people that have the luxury of watching a YouTube video about what's the better form of monetary savings for 50 years from now, right? These are people that are stuck under the thumb of various political tyrannies and political currency tyrannies that are just trying to live. And so the reality of why I'm so passionate about Bitcoin, and why I would highly encourage you to continue to be involved in Bitcoin, is not only for the sake of helping preserve Bitcoin, but it's for the sake of reducing the damage and reducing the fallout and human destruction, the preventable human casualties of the political currency system unwinding over the next few decades. Not only do we need as many people as possible using Bitcoin for the sake of the Bitcoin network, but we also need as many people using Bitcoin as possible so that eventually, inherently, when the political currencies hyperinflate, collapse, and die, and they have all kinds of horrible events like we saw in Sri Lanka a couple years ago, like we saw in Turkey a few years before that, or Argentina, or other places of the world where massive inflationary events have very real human costs in the form of a scarcity in food, in the form of a scarcity in housing, in the form of a scarcity of energy, right? Whatever it is, we have to help mitigate and absorb some of the blowout of these political currencies. That is another trade-off that inherently is a downside. So number one is that human incomes and human labor and all of the forms of assets are going to lose their monetary premium. That is an inherent downside if you're a Bitcoin hyperbull like myself. The second inevitable downside is that if you're going to have a Bitcoin future, these political currencies are going to die. Now again, a lot of the fiat maxi, small-minded, tiny brain, 85 IQ, people commenting in the comments down below, a lot of those folks, they would say, oh, look, you're rooting for the hyperinflation of these currencies. You're evil. You're promoting, collapse. You're promoting instability. Bitcoin's only going to $1 million if we have hyperinflation, blah, 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 right? And those people still don't understand. Hyperinflation is going to happen anyway. The dollar's going to die anyway, right? Like, it's going to happen anyway, but at least with Bitcoin, there is an escape route for people to go into to preserve their economic purchasing power, and more importantly than doing that is preserving enough commodities, water, food, shelter, enough of those basic life essential commodities to be able to survive, right? That's the real thing that matters at the end of the day. I don't care about numbers. All that is secondary to helping more people have more abundant, more prosperous lives for a longer period of time, right? And so being a Bitcoiner, you don't have to feel guilty about saying it's inevitable that the political currencies are going to die and that Bitcoin is going to absorb the fallout, right? You don't have to feel guilty at all. In fact, you're actually one of the people making a difference, right? And so all the people out there that are whining and complaining about, oh, Bitcoin's only going to 10 million versus hyperinflation. How expensive is a loaf of bread going to be when Bitcoin's $10 million, right? All those people, right? Like, I literally don't care when I see those kinds of comments. And I get those comments all the time. A lot of people have called me all kinds of things. They call me evil. They call me, this horrible person, right? For promoting Bitcoin, blah, blah, blah. I get so much hate mail, right? So many hate comments over the course of years, right? I get it. I'm used to it. I'm not listening to you people because I know that you're wrong. You have all these pessimistic worldviews and you're not doing anything about it. Do something about it. Bitcoin is small enough. You, my dear viewers, have enough of a very real impact. I don't care if you're doing a monthly dollar cost average. I don't care if you're running a node. I don't care if you're mining. But as long as you're doing something in Bitcoin, hopefully at the very least buying Bitcoin and taking self-custody of that Bitcoin, at the very least if you're doing those things, you're having a very real impact and you're increasing the probability that in the future, when these political currencies hyperinflate, that more people are going to have a larger pool of liquidity and a larger Bitcoin ecosystem to immigrate into, right? They will be able to leave and flee from their local political currency jurisdiction that is collapsing under them in the form of hyperinflation, and they will be able to digitally immigrate into this new country, this Bitcoin country that's not going to steal and harvest their wealth over time. That's the second thing to keep in mind. So first, we talked about the negative trade-off of this Bitcoin hyper-bullish hopium. The first trade-off is that human incomes are going to become demonetized. The second big trade-off is that political currency is going to hyperinflate. There will be dozens, if not hundreds, of these hyperinflationary events over the next 50 years. They will start out slow. They'll happen once every couple of years, like we saw in Sri Lanka, Turkey, or Argentina, and then it will happen faster and faster and faster again and again and again. And some countries will have multiple hyperinflationary events before the people finally figure it out. The majority of people in Argentina, the majority of people in Sri Lanka, the majority of people in Turkey, the majority of those people still have not adopted Bitcoin. Sure, on a per capita basis, they're doing pretty well, but on an absolute basis, the vast majority of people still got to figure it out. And so not only could we be looking at potentially hundreds of hyperinflationary events over the next 50 years, but potentially even more as countries tend to have multiple hyperinflationary events before everybody figures it out that this whole charade is not going to survive forever. Even if you start it anew and you inject new politicians and you inject new promises and hopium, right? It's not going to work. You got to have a solid monetary base, one that's based on luck, one that's based on energy, not one that's based on authority. As we finish up this video, let me tell you the third negative trade-off, the third thing to keep in mind as you're waiting for Bitcoin to go upwards forever. The third thing you got to keep in mind, this is one that ruffles a lot of feathers, surprisingly, to me, but if you actually are bullish on Bitcoin, if you think Bitcoin actually is going to change billions of lives, if you think that actually there are going to be hyperinflationary events in the world, then you are naive if you don't think anybody's going to come after your Bitcoin. Okay, let's say you're watching this, and let's say you have 1/10 of a Bitcoin. Oh, Luke, I have 1/10 of a Bitcoin. I wish I was too late. Man, I wish I got more Bitcoin. Boo-hoo, right? Whatever. Okay, fine. Get over yourself, right? 1/10 of a Bitcoin is a lot of money. Why do I know it's a lot of money? It's because 1/10 of one Bitcoin is exactly 1/210 millionth of the entire Bitcoin network. You think you're too late to Bitcoin because you only have 0.21 Bitcoin. Do you realize that is 1/100 millionth of the network? Oh, Luke, I only have 3 Bitcoin. Wah, I wish I was earlier. That's 1/7 millionth of the network, buddy, right? Oh, Luke, I only have 7 Bitcoin. That's 1/3 millionth of the network. Luke, I only have 21 Bitcoin. This friend I knew, he had 100 Bitcoin. I wish I had 100 Bitcoin. 21 Bitcoin's not that much, right? 21 Bitcoin's 1/1 millionth of the network, All these things I've heard before. And so I don't care if you have 2% of a Bitcoin, or you have 20 Bitcoin, or even 100 Bitcoin. I've heard it from everybody. I've heard it from people with hundreds of Bitcoin. I've heard it from people with 100th of a Bitcoin. Everybody. It's universal to human nature. We all feel like we're behind. We all feel like when we compare ourselves to others, our immediate circle, we all feel like we missed out. Stop it. For goodness sakes, if you have 100 Bitcoin, you got a crap ton of Bitcoin. You're doing fine. Stop comparing yourself to that guy that tried to orange pill you 3 years before you started buying Bitcoin that has 3 to 5 times as much Bitcoin as you. Stop it. He's got more Bitcoin than you. Live with it. Don't gamble what you have. Be happy with your 100 Bitcoin. And I know most of you watching this think that I'm making that up, but it's true. It happens. Why? Because it's human nature, right? The same exact thing is true for those of you with half a Bitcoin. You think, oh, I don't need to take self-custody seriously because I only have half a Bitcoin. Nobody would go after me. Again, I beg of you, wake up, bucko. If you got half a Bitcoin, you have 1/42 millionth of the entire Bitcoin network. How many malicious people do you think there are in the world that would be willing to try to steal your Bitcoin? It's not 0, it's more than 0. Probably it's not 10,000, but it's more than 0, right? If you own half a Bitcoin, you own a share of 1/42 millionth of the future. That means 1/42 millionth of all the houses in the future. Are there more than 42 million houses in the future? Absolutely there are. Are there more than 42 million cars in the future? Absolutely. Are there more than 42 billion barrels of oil? Absolutely. Your half a Bitcoin is thousands of barrels of oil, probably dozens of houses, potentially hundreds of cars, or at least dozens of cars, right? At least cars that will travel way better, way faster, be automated when compared to today's cars, right? The point is, I don't care. If you're in the mid-2020s and you're buying any significant amount of Bitcoin, whether that's a tenth of a Bitcoin, if you're a 10th coiner, whole coiner, multi-whole coiner, multi-deca whole coiner, multi-centa whole coiner, whomever you are, wherever you are on that spectrum, all of you are in a very wide range of multiple orders of magnitude within the top 0.5%, within the top 0.1% of humanity. And so, you can watch all the bullish hopium you want. You can watch my videos, you can like and subscribe, you can comment down below, you can be as bullish as you want, kid. But the reality is that if you are not taking self-custody, then you are just being a hypocrite to yourself, right? It's like watching my YouTube videos and not subscribing to the channel. It's like, what are you doing? You're watching the whole videos, and I appreciate that, but you're not subscribing? Like, clearly you like the content enough to watch the whole thing, but you're not subscribing for future videos? I don't know what you're doing. You're being a hypocrite to yourself, right? The same thing is true with Bitcoin. If you're so bullish on Bitcoin that you're sure it's going to millions of dollars a coin, but yet you don't take self-custody, then I don't know what you're doing, right? Like, because by your own worldview, you're eventually going to lose it. If you just let it sit on exchanges, eventually somebody's going to steal it from you. So you got to get off the exchanges. And the other thing, which is even more controversial because we're even earlier in this adoption curve, is that of multisig. I've been begging people for years to adopt multisig. The vast majority of people are doing multisig. 90% of people in Bitcoin are still on exchanges. And 90% of the people that of the 10% that are not on exchanges, at least 90%, probably more like 95% of people are in single sig, hot wallets, cold storage, whatever, right? But you have to remember, there are only 200 million transactions in a given year on the Bitcoin blockchain. There are 400 million companies in the world, and there are 8 billion people in the world today. And keep in mind that eventually there'll be tens of billions of artificial intelligences or robotics or whatever that are putting in a human level equivalent amount of output, right? So we're literally going to go from a few million people using the Bitcoin network on chain to potentially tens of billions of economic entities, human and artificial, contributing to the Bitcoin network, right? Hundreds of millions of companies, billions of people, billions of robots using the Bitcoin network. And yet you think you're going to be holding UTXOs in a single point of failure? I don't think you have really thought through the long-term implications of what's coming, right? 10 years from now, 20 years, 15 years, 8 years, whatever it is, it doesn't matter the year. Eventually, nobody will be using single sig as a form of security or as a form of self-custody for their Bitcoin. And I know that's controversial, and people love to hate on me in the comments for saying that, but I'm just telling you that's how it's going to be. A decade ago, in the very early days of Bitcoin, before there were seed words, by the way, nobody was using seed words, obviously. And now, basically everybody is, because it's viewed as more secure, because the odds of a single point of failure yourself screwing it up are way lower than actually writing out the entire private key, right? So obviously, as Bitcoin evolves and as it upgrades, security measures have to upgrade. You don't get to have a 1000x in purchasing power increase for your Bitcoin without at least increasing the security of your Bitcoin by a factor of 10,000. You know, and you may think that I'm just being a pessimistic doomsdayer, but I'm telling you, this is what's going to happen. If you want to have Bitcoin take over the world and go to infinity over 21 million, trade-off number one is that your income is going to be demonetized, along with everybody else's income, by the way. Trade-off number two is that we are going to have hyperinflations. But that was going to happen anyway, right? And trade-off number three is that the reality is, if you hold any significant amount of Bitcoin, you got to obsess on continually increasing your security over time. Obviously, I'm saying this is with a self-interest because this is exactly what I do in my consultancy, in my work at the Bitcoin Advisor, right? This is literally my job, is to help my clients. You know, some of them have hundreds of Bitcoin, many of them have tens of Bitcoin, many of them have multiple whole coins, and a lot of them don't even have a whole coin yet, right? But whoever they are, wherever they are in the world, whatever stack they have, the goal of myself and the company is help people continuously over time increase their Bitcoin stack. And that is why we only get paid as a result of helping people be secure, right? So obviously, yes, this whole thing is, you know, in self-promotion, trying to promote that, yes. And you should definitely book a call with me. We definitely should have a conversation. Most of you won't, and that's totally okay. Honestly, I don't want to work with most of you because I couldn't work with most of you, right? If there are tens of thousands of people that follow me today, eventually maybe 100,000, Lord willing, in the future, if, you know, people continue to like my videos, you know, if there are 100,000 people following me, there's no way I can help with 100,000 of you, right? And so ultimately, I only want to work with the people that actually have this kind of worldview like the one I'm describing here. So yes, this is self-promotion, but at the end of the day, I don't care if you work with me or not because I know most of you wouldn't be able to work with anyway. The encouragement here is probably you're way too pessimistic on Bitcoin price, and you're probably way too optimistic on the security of your Bitcoin. See, most people that think they're smart, that think they've thought this through, that think they've obsessed about this, you know, these people with $100 worth of Bitcoin, right, that comment down below in the comment section with all this negativity, you know, they think that saying Bitcoin's going to $10 million is way too unreasonable. It's way too optimistic. And they think that, oh, you're being way too pessimistic when it comes to the amount of people that are going to try to steal your Bitcoin. But the reality is, I think they're wrong. I think the route of max pain is coming. And I think the route of max pain is that Bitcoin goes way higher than we all expect in real terms, but also in nominal terms as political currencies hyperinflate. I think that's the route of max pain. And I think also the route of max pain is that the majority of Bitcoin is stolen. If you were in Bitcoin 10 years ago and you had 10,000 coins at one point, you probably lost literally 99% of the Bitcoin you have, right? And that's many stories I've seen. I know a good number of people that back in the good old days, back in the very, very early first epoch, right? You know, these are people that had literally 10,000 Bitcoin because one Bitcoin was like, you know, $2 or whatever, right? They had 20 grand in Bitcoin, that's, you know, 10,000 coins or whatever, right? I know a good number of people that had tens of thousands of coins. Do they have 10,000 coins now? Obviously no, because they lost 99% of it. What about the people 8 years ago or 5 years ago, right? Well, maybe they had 100 Bitcoin at one point or 50 or 20 or whatever, but they probably lost like 90% of their Bitcoin. That's still a massive loss. Granted, that's 10 times less of a loss than the people that lost 99% of their Bitcoin. So it got 10 times better. But guess what? The people today in Bitcoin right now, including you all watching this video, I genuinely believe that most of you are probably going to lose somewhere between a third to 2/3 of your Bitcoin over the course of the next decade or two. From who? From people trying to steal it, from user error, from selling it too early, from the tax man, from lawsuits, from whatever it is, right? Probably most people in Bitcoin today are going to lose the majority of it. That's just being real. You know, you can say that's being pessimistic, but I think that if you want to accept the bullish hopium of, oh, I'm so early to Bitcoin, most people have yet to adopt it yet, then you have to accept the reality, the trade-off of that being that, well, shoot, that means that I'm probably going to lose a lot of it. So anyway, hopefully this video has been useful to you, but the big point I want you to take away from this video is that the things that are more valuable are the things that are harder to produce. Bitcoin as a monetary system is more valuable because it is harder to produce a string of numbers with all ones in front, right? Like just like when you look at a output of a SHA-256 hash and you see the leading zeros at the beginning of the output with every single Bitcoin block originating all the way back to Satoshi's block, all the way back in January 2009. You see those leading zeros going all the way back. And so you can verify just by looking at the number that this number took energy to reproduce. That is a better monetary system than the political currency system. And it's why it is inevitable that Bitcoin dominates when that collapses. Fiat is going to collapse because it is dirt. Bitcoin is going to survive because it is the well-organized, well-maintained cornfield. Bitcoin is going to survive because it is the flower. It is the flower. It is the honey that the bees produce. It is not just the dirt or just the artificial nonsense that's made up out of thin air by somebody in a suit and a tie that's telling you that their money has value because they're pointing a gun at you saying, give me your money, and this is the way it's going to be just because I say so. I'm a monetary god, listen to me, right? So Bitcoin is the better system. As it grows, it becomes lower risk to become a part of. Unlike everything in human history we've understood, when it comes, it's totally different. As the amount of gold in the bank vault grows, the target on that grows. As the value of productivity grows, the threat of political currency grows. As everything else grows in size, it becomes a larger target. It's easier to exploit and a better risk-adjusted return way of stealing money. Bitcoin is the opposite. And so, my friend, the harsh trade-off is that you are that new bank. You are that new single point of failure. And all those people in the future that are going to spend thousands of hours trying to figure out how to steal a mere tenth of a Bitcoin, you are their new weak link. They're not going to go after the Bitcoin network as a whole because they know they won't be able to get it. But all those malicious people, they're going to focus on people that own large shares of the Bitcoin network. And my dear friend, that is you, that is me. For me, I'm exceedingly confident in the security setup that I have. My clients, my partners are also exceedingly confident in the security setup we have. It's why I'm willing to put my face, my name, my phone number, my email, right? You even know where I live, right? Yeah, I'm not naive. Like this very field, even though it's a random cornfield, like AI in 5 years, it will know exactly where this cornfield is, right? There are already people out there that, in a terrifying way can figure out where you are just based upon, the markers that you see, right? I can't figure it out. If you showed me this picture, I couldn't tell you what field this is, but you get the right person, you get the right AI, I'm not naive. People can figure out where I live. People already know where I live, right? Even though I've never shared that online, right? But the point here is that we have less in common with the future in the past. And if you want to have a hyper bullish, hyper Bitcoinized future world, then you got to accept the reality that the reason why Bitcoin is better, meaning that it can't be taken over, is the exact reason why you are the new honeypot. You are the new target, right? 10 years from now, my subscribers, they're going to be big targets for all these malicious attackers, right? They're going to be looking at my subscribers. They're going to be looking at the people in the comment section. They're going to be trying to figure out who you are. If you make a comment on this YouTube video today saying, oh, Luke, you're being a pessimist with people are never going to go after me. I only have a tenth of a Bitcoin. I only have half of a Bitcoin or whatever, right? People 10 years from now are going to travel back in time in the internet trying to figure out who had Bitcoin back in the day, right? In the same way that malicious people try to look at the Bitcoin mempool, try to look at the untrained transactions from 2010, 12, 14, 16, right? They look back there because at the time, people were just moving a few $1,000s of Bitcoin. Now it's a large amount of money. And people happen to not upgrade their security from that past moment to the present moment. Those are the easiest people to go after, right? So don't complain to me saying that I'm too much of a pessimist for saying that, you are the new bank, you are the new honeypot. I'm just telling you the inherent trade-off of what's going to happen here. If you want to have all the upside of being a self-sovereign Bitcoin bank in the future, then guess what? You are the new bank to rob, right? Because there's no more banks to rob in the world anymore. You are the new bank. I am the new bank, right? Like, that's the trade-off. If you want to have Bitcoin take over all the world's fiat's going to die. So anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. This rambling rant from a guy in a tie in the middle of a lumber and cornfield with a bunch of dice on a table. I feel a little weird in a lot of these videos doing these things. But if you appreciated it, please like, comment, subscribe. If you want to have a conversation about increasing your Bitcoin security, you know where to reach me. Obviously, please do. Because, it is in my benefit, but even more so, it's in your benefit. This is why I do what I do. I don't want to see you lose 10%, 30%, or, God forbid, all of your Bitcoin to some stupid scammer or some lawsuit shark or some government tax man. Please don't do that. Please don't be that person. I meet a lot of those people, and that's never fun for me. I do these videos to clear my conscience because I see things all the time. Just last night, I was at dinner with my family, and this guy texted me, and he was about to lose multiple whole coins, and it's like, don't be that guy. I do the best I can. I put all this work into these videos, and 90% of people think that I'm just being a fear monger, that I'm too bullish on Bitcoin, but I really don't think I am. I think Bitcoin's going so much higher. I think even just 100,000 sats or a million sats is going to be a very significant amount of wealth. Give it 20 years or so. I think eventually it's going to be that. And, I think most Bitcoiners are horribly naive with how evil people can be, with how malicious people in the world can be, and how big of a target you actually are. In 10 years, nobody's going to be using single sig. In 10 years, anybody with more than a tenth of Bitcoin is going to be viewed as a high net worth person, right? What else do you expect? Bitcoin's going to be a couple $1 million, and you got you got a tenth of a Bitcoin. You're going to have at least a couple $100,000, right? I don't think people realize how much of a threat these Bitcoin holders are going to be. You know, like Bitcoiners will simultaneously rant all day, every freaking day about how evil the central banks are, about how horrible scammers are, and then we'll just magically pretend that everything's a kumbaya utopia when it comes to your Bitcoin self-custody. Oh, I have my 12 words memorized. Oh, well, I gave my brother my seed phrase, so everything's fine. It's like, no, it's not fine. You have to understand that this is eventually going to be a multi-generational level of wealth, and you got to protect it. In the same way that most people today don't use a paper Bitcoin wallet, they use seed phrases and single sigs. That's not going to be in the future, right? In the future, 99.5% of the world is never going to be able to have access to base layer UTXOs, right? Like at least 99% of the world, probably 99.7% of the world, right? When you factor in that there's only 50 million entities that can do one transaction a quarter, there's 400 million companies in the world. You know, like barely 20% of the companies in the world are going to be able to have base chain Bitcoin. And barely 0.5% of the world's population is going to be able to use UTXOs, right? Forgetting all of the future robotics and AIs, right? And I just really worry. I just really think that most people in Bitcoin are not actually thinking this through, that, oh my gosh, over the next 10 years, my wealth is going to increase by a factor of 100. And therefore, the number of threats coming after me is going to increase probably by a factor of 1,000. Because this is the other thing that people that don't have a lot of Bitcoin don't keep in mind. You know, the people that are negative, the people that say I'm being a pessimist, they don't have a lot of Bitcoin, clearly, and they don't know anybody that has a lot of Bitcoin. And believe me, I have, you know, a non-zero amount of Bitcoin, right? And I know a lot of people that have a very large amount of Bitcoin. And I'm telling you, if your wealth goes up by a factor of 100, the number of threats and attacks coming after you, they don't go up by a factor of 100, they go up by a factor of 1,000, because the risk reward is so much better going after somebody with a larger honeypot than a smaller one, right? And so I don't think Bitcoiners are ready for a 10x, let alone a 100x in their wealth over the next 10 years. I think it's going to be terrifying. We have all these Bitcoiners that are going to merge into this wealthy class, and we have this current wealthy class that are about to hyper accelerate into Bitcoin. And I don't want to see the people with $10 million or more entering into Bitcoin, taking all of the time away from the Bitcoin advisors or the Bitcoin consultants or the Bitcoin legal teams out there trying to protect them, right? I want to see the Bitcoiners. I want to see you be protected. I want to see you take these things seriously, because if you don't, then all these people with money in the future, they're gonna take up all the supply, and you know, the only thing scarcer than Bitcoin at that point will be people that understand how to protect that Bitcoin. You know, so anyway, you know, I mean, I don't care if you reach out to me, book a call with me. Obviously, I hope you do. Obviously, it's in my self-interest if you do. Obviously, I think could be of great amount of help, because the more exciting thing is figuring out how to help you buy more Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, I just want you to do it. I just want you to do it, you know, and I'm clearing my conscience, you know, because I get those calls, you know, where people, you know, I mean, all the time, I meet people that have lost half a Bitcoin, a whole Bitcoin, multiple whole coins, in some cases dozens, and in a couple cases even 100 Bitcoin or more. You know, I've seen all those scenarios. Actually, there's a couple scenarios I've seen people lose more than 1,000 Bitcoin. Granted, you know, most of those are a couple years ago. But point is, these things still happen today. People still lose large amounts of Bitcoin. It still happens, and it's going to happen in the future, whether you like it or not. And, you know, the nice thing is that I've never had a conflict in my conscience of saying, man, I wish I'd warn more people. I've made as many videos as possible warning people, begging people to buy Bitcoin, begging people to go to self-custody, begging people to actually think beyond the next 24 months when it comes to their Bitcoin self-custodial solution, right? Like, I've made all these videos begging people, and most people won't listen. And you know what? That's okay. Why? Because Bitcoin is going up forever, Laura. It's going to be an endless amount of political currency chasing a finite amount of Bitcoin left. And if you're somebody that actually believes a future, then you're going to be the kind of person that takes action. And for everybody else, I'm sorry, but they're lost. I've done everything I can, and they're going to be wandering in the fields on their own trying to figure it out. I wish them all the best, but the reality is that I've seen what it's like for that, and the odds are not good. You know, you can stay in fiat world if you want, but without Bitcoin, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And you can stay on the exchanges if you want. Most of you I know will, and I know that probably at least, you know, half of the people that follow me on YouTube here still have 100% of everything they have on the exchanges, and you can do that if you want, but I'm telling you, that's going to be a very real problem, and I will not be able to help you at some point when everybody else also wakes up at the true cost of their own procrastination. So I hope this video was helpful. If you enjoyed the guy in the middle of the cornfield with the infinity over 21 million Bitcoin thing and a bunch of dice in his pocket, you know, wearing a tie. I mean, if you like this kind of weird stuff, like and subscribe, I guess. And if you don't like this kind of stuff because you have your own opinions or whatever, okay, fine. Bye, go away. So anyway, thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you watched to the end of the video. Otherwise, I don't know what you're doing here. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks.